Aloha! Welcome to another episode of Think Tech Hawaii's Education, Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. I'm your host, Carl Campagna. Many people believe that education is the silver bullet, or the linchpin that can help solve homelessness, drug addiction, social division, and income inequality. And in Hawaii, of all places, where our many intertwined cultures all cherish our keiki and do all we can to open doors for their successes, would we not assume that a high priority is placed on having a world-class educational system? We are talking about the quality of our facilities and infrastructure, addressing deferred maintenance, adding cool rooms, and a more comprehensive curriculum approach, and appropriately valuing teachers and administrative staff. Today I want to talk about a brief history of HSTA, teachers, and then curriculum. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today, founding member and former executive director of the Hawaii State Teachers Association, Ms. Joan Husted. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
No, very thrilled to have you here today. And thank you for being able to make it. I think it was a bit short notice as well. All right, so a few questions, quite a few questions. One thing I would like to jump into is, let's get the history. Let's understand a bit of the history. I believe HSTA was founded in 1971, is that correct?
That's right. Actually, it was created by the 1968 convention, and it went into effect when the law passed in 1971.
Okay, and that is when you became executive director?
No, I was a teacher leader. Okay. And I chaired the HSTA's negotiating team because I had negotiated in Michigan when Michigan passed its law. There weren't very many of us around who had any experience. I joined the staff in 1973, officially as chief negotiator, and then I ran all field operations. I didn't become executive director until 2001. I told them I practiced enough, don't you think I can do it? And they said, oh, sure, go do it.
Chief negotiator, I can imagine. So you're at the table in those negotiations with the governor's office.
Yes.
Who else is at that table?
Well, for our side, we had a 5-member teacher team, myself as chief negotiator, and then I had a negotiation specialist who was a staff member. And we were at the team. We could bring other people into bargaining as needed. The state they had a very large team. Sometimes it was as much as 25 people. They had various department heads, budget and finance. State personnel would be in there, the governor's office, the office of the chief negotiator. When I started, the office of the chief negotiator, I think, had 5 or 7 people in it, professional staff. And then they had DOE people who would come in. And then there were 2 Board of Education members who were always in the team. Sometimes it got as small as 10, sometimes it got as large as 25.
Wow. Okay, so there's a lot of people at the table then.
Yes.
So finding compromise can be a challenge anyway.
Well, it depends on how you bargain. You know, in our early years, we were all a bunch of young Turks. We came out of the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War protests, and we knew everything, and don't you tell us. And we used to march around with signs that were kind of offensive when I think about it today. And Tommy Trask, who was with the ILWU, pulled me to one side one day. Actually, he took me over to Flamingo Chuckwagon, and he said, Joan, I want you to learn one lesson in bargaining. Hawaii is a community of relationships. You can disagree all you want on the issue, but don't be disagreeable at the bargaining table. And that was the most valuable lesson I learned.
That is very wise. Yeah. That is very wise, and it's very true.
It is, absolutely.
In every instance that I have had the opportunity to be at a negotiating table, I have witnessed either as just a witness or as a participant that it's really about the relationship.
It is. If you have to treat each other courteously, and frankly, you get treated the way you treat people.
Yes.
And sometimes, not everybody behaved like angels. And there was a place for righteous indignation. I don't mean to imply that you could get insulted and you just had to turn the other cheek. But you used it sparingly. When you did it, people knew you were angry because you didn't behave that way all the time.
Sure. So, it makes it more powerful.
Yes.
So absolutely. So, all right. What would you say? Let's back up for a brief moment and say, what inspired, you mentioning some of this, what inspired the formation of HSTA and why it's needed?
Well, what inspired HSTA to be created is now a word that you're starting to hear again, and that was empowerment. We wanted teachers to be empowered to have a say in what happened in their schools. We wanted teachers to be paid as professionals. We wanted teachers to have some of the benefits that other school districts just took for granted, like preparation periods and duty-free lunch periods. I came from Michigan, that we took that for granted. I came into Hawaii and I said, "Oh, I'll see you during your prep period." And they said, "What is that?"
Oh, wow.
You know, so it was to empower teachers to have a say in their schools, have a say in their curriculum, to have a say in what happened with the kids in their class. After all, they're professionals. And what we found is they got told what to do rather than asked, "What do you think we ought to be doing?" So collective bargaining gave them a voice to do that, and that's really the impetus for the bargaining process.
And it's not just a voice, from my opinion, and sure, correct me, please. In my opinion, it's not just a voice for the teachers, which is an important voice. Mm-hmm. It's also a voice for the keiki, for the students.
Well, if teachers are not happy, it's a given, and the research clearly shows it. If teachers feel that they're trapped, they have no say in what they're doing, children feel that. Children know that. And, you know, a teacher who feels empowered empowers their classrooms.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. You see that in all professions, actually.
Absolutely.
If you feel you've got opportunity, if you feel you have room to grow and
mm-hmm.
move,
mm-hmm.
you're going to be more motivated, more
mm-hmm.
excited about
mm-hmm.
getting up and going to work that day.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense.
And you know, no hospital administrator could tell a doctor in an operating room, "Oh, you have to operate this way, or you have to put your stitches in this way," or what. But it was very common for teachers to be told, "You do this, you use this program, you don't use that program, you got to give these grades." Very demeaning.
Yeah, and I fear some of that is still there today. We'll talk about that in a bit. So, okay, what would you say has changed from the beginning to today? What has changed? What have been some of the biggest successes, perhaps?
Well, actually, we've gone through cycles. Through the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. Teachers had a great deal of control of what was going on in their classroom. In fact, principals had considerably more control on what was going on in their schools. A lot of collaboration, a lot of working out solutions to problems we both agreed were in existence. People like Don Nugent, who worked at the Department of Education, was terrific to work with. In the 2000s, and with the intervention of the federal laws, what we saw was shutting down that empowerment and insisting that schools all do certain things the same way. And as a result, we're seeing an enormous turnover of teachers, and we're seeing an enormous turnover of school administrators who are saying, "I don't need to do this. I didn't go to college to have a hired gun come in and tell me what reading program I should be using or what test I have to give my kids in my classroom." So we've almost gone back to the 70s, the early 70s.
Wow, so the cycle has brought itself back
That's
again.
right. And I think everyone would agree, the DOE is not better for it.
Interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, and I can see that. Again, we're going to talk a bit about the curriculum and sort of teachers' roles as well.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say has been, in your time, whether as chief negotiator or executive director, what have been your biggest challenges?
In the early years, it was credibility. We would get asked at the bargaining table, "Well, how many teachers do you talk for?"
Okay.
My next door neighbor is a teacher, and she says she doesn't agree with your proposal at the bargaining table. And you have to earn respect, and you have to earn credibility. So that was the challenge of the 70s. And then we had the Nixon wage and price freeze, so that impacted bargaining. We had a decline of teaching positions, and we had teachers laid off in the 70s. In the 80s was a degree of collaboration. The parties agreed, sit down and, hey, we're in this boat together, we might as well row in the same direction. And you probably saw the greatest gains, not only for teachers, but for schools. And then that extended into the 90s. For example, we extended the school year, increased the number of days in the school year. In the 90s, we created the 12-month contract. We have a number of teachers who are in 12-month contracts and work all year long.
Instead of 9-month contracts.
Instead of 9-month contracts. In fact, we proposed to put everybody on 12-month contracts. Don Nugent, who I mentioned earlier, and I took a look at how we could make intersessions good working sessions for teachers so they could do curriculum planning and professional development. Our biggest challenge has always been money. Whenever you come up with, everybody sits there and they say, oh, that's a terrific idea, but it costs too much.
Costs too much. We can't get the money from the state. We can't get the money from
No, it costs too much. We can't do it. And that from 1971 to today has been the mantra of a number of people. 1971, my collective bargaining agreement cost $6 million.
Wow.
When I left in 2007, that contract cost $121 million.
Okay, times have changed. A little bit of inflation in there, a lot of things.
Well, more teachers.
More teachers.
You know, we started with 9,000 teachers. We ended up with almost 14,000 teachers.
Okay.
Special ed did not, in the 70s, was not the financial, I don't want to call it a drain because we owe those kids a good quality education.
Absolutely.
But we're putting more in what the the consent decree, the Felix consent decree, I think cost the state $600 to $800 million to, you know, but it was always money. We could never go 12 months for teachers because it cost too much money.
But at the same time, though, you're putting those teachers at a disadvantage because now they need to figure out how they're going to earn money for those 3 months.
Yeah. And that was the advantage of the 12-month because you did away with the extra jobs.
Exactly, did away with the extra jobs
the 2 and 3 jobs
that was associated with them.
And you also would have ended, I think, the out-migration of teachers who say we can't make it in Hawaii.
And that's still the case now. Many teachers.
Well, it's gotten alarmingly. We have the highest turnover of teachers in the United States.
Yes, and I know there is a teacher shortage crisis. We don't
Absolutely.
have enough qualified teachers, certainly for special education, let alone just regular courses when you have too many students per classroom.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the tendency of the system is to dumb down the system. So in other words, when you have a shortage of teachers, let's make it easier to become a teacher. And I had a DOE person who told me, how hard is it to be a teacher? All you have to do is keep 1 page ahead of the kids.
Yep.
We don't say, we have a shortage of doctors in the state of Hawaii, particularly rural. We don't say, well, skip medical school, we'll pick somebody up who had biology.
Right. Well, a number of years ago, there was a nursing shortage. Right. And there were a number of initiatives that were created and generated through policy, through legislation, that was able to spur the increase of nurses so that we can satisfy that. And so that should really be done from the education perspective. It really comes down to where are you placing that priority and why is that priority not on the children, because the children are our future, right? So yes, that's a huge challenge. Within there, we have to go to a break in a minute, but within there, there's also the discussion of how much of that comes down, how much of the rules and how much of the discussions come down from federal versus state? How much of the challenges exist as a result of federal mandate and regulation and or state mandate and regulation? Does it vary, or has there been more weighted in one than the other?
Hawaii reacts to federal mandates differently than many other states do. As I say, I sit on the Education Commission of the states. I think the biggest problem is how Hawaii has chosen to implement those mandates rather than the mandates themselves. A number of states have managed the same federal mandates in a very different fashion. and we've always argued with the Department of Education, look, let's take a look at what you can and cannot do rather than say, oh, we have to do it because the federal government says we have to do it.
Right. Okay, well that is, that's perhaps a topic, an entirely another show topic actually. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break, so please stay with us. We'll be back shortly. Again, I wanted to thank you for joining us. I'm Carl Campagna, host of Think Tech Hawaii's Education, Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. And again, thank you, my host, my guest, Ms. Joan Husted.
Thank you.
Aloha, this is Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, and I want to thank you for watching Think Tech Hawaii. We are delighted to be partners with Think Tech because it gives us the opportunity to bring to you a show every week on Monday at 2:00 p.m. called Ehana Kako. Ehana Kako means let's work together, because we believe that Hawaii will be a better place when everybody works together. And in what way? Well, at the Grassroots Institute, we research 3 basic areas, and we invite guests to come on board from across the country, the state, and the nation to talk about a better economy, a better government, a better society. Now, aren't those things we all want? Indeed. If you'd like to have the latest research in terms of public policy, as well as ways in which we can build a better government, economy, and society, then tune in every Monday on Think Tech Hawaii at 2:00 p.m. for our fascinating guests on Ehana Kako. Let's work together. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, and I'll see you then. Aloha.
Aloha, welcome back to Think Tech Hawaii's Education, Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. I'm your host, Carl Campagna, and once again we have our amazing guest, Ms. Joan Husted. All right, let's move on to teachers specifically. Let's talk about the teachers. I've heard many people talk about teachers, and some have positive things to say, some think teachers are a problem. Some say that we need to have drug tests for teachers, and that we need to have measurement tools, and those measurement tools are the tests that our kids take. Well, yes, okay, there are problems and challenges there. Then there's the accountability question, and how are we holding the teachers accountable? How are we holding the administration and staff accountable? Where is that coming in? Those are big questions, and big questions that a lot of people, when they hear, well, the teachers are asking for more money again, they say, well, how are they doing? Why do they deserve a raise? Why do they? What's the challenge there? Where do you think, within that conversation, where do you think the accountability and responsibility really lies? Where is I'm sure it's a percentage, a little here, a little there, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I think we're all accountable. The community, I'm a taxpayer. I'm accountable to make sure that the DOE, the taxes are such that the Department of Education gets, the legislators are accountable to make sure the department gets the money. Parents are accountable to ensure that kids who come to school ready to learn. And that means they're fed, that means they're clothed, that means they understand that mommy and daddy, or mommy and grandma, whoever is the guardian, is expecting a level of behavior. The school administrator is accountable for giving his teachers the flexibility and freedom to use their professional judgment. And the teachers are accountable to deliver the program they've been hired to teach. They're accountable to make sure they come to school. They're accountable for getting their lesson plans done. They're accountable for behaving in a professional fashion towards their students. So everybody has a piece of the accountability. What's happened now is the only people accountable are the teachers. And I wish teachers had that much power.
Yeah.
That they could
that
be
much well, because they're given well, that's sort of the topic of the next section, is the curriculum that they're given, and within that is the conversation of, well, what's the difference between the private schools and what they're able to do, and the public schools and what they're able to do, and those requirements. So we'll jump into that in a minute. But so thinking about ways to measure, because it's the topic. Every time there's a conversation, and I know there are bills out there at the moment talking about teacher salaries and infrastructure and a range of others, as well as talking about a more comprehensive approach to the curriculum. So those are out there. The bills are out there, and they're important, at the very least, to make sure the conversation is happening. What is a reasonable way to measure a teacher's performance?
Well, there's several ways of doing it, and the DOE did it in those varied ways. Number one is you need a good teacher evaluation system. To make a teacher evaluation system workable, you've got to give school administrators the time to evaluate. I had 43 staff members at HSTA. I was immediately responsible for 14. And they were very much like teachers. They were out in the field. I didn't see them. They weren't sitting across from me every day. It was tough to evaluate them, to give them the time I needed to give them to see what they were doing. So for a school administrator to be able to go into classrooms, to have the time to sit down and talk to teachers, what is it, Carl, you're trying to accomplish in your classroom? What's working, what's not working? Those are some of the ways you can evaluate. Two is how well kids are doing. If I were a school administrator and everybody in your class was getting failing grades, I certainly would have a conversation with you about what's happening.
Yeah, what's
Now,
happening.
you might tell me I'm teaching them a lesson that if they don't do their homework, this is what's going to happen. And when they learn that lesson, it'll break itself loose. Fine. But if you're telling me, you know, these kids are lazy and they're not learning the stuff, and I'm not going to give, that's a different clue. And that tells me something about the way you teach in your classroom.
The other idea that is given, that some people consider an excuse, really, is the parents aren't helping at home. The parents need to be engaged, and the parents need to be involved in following up and teaching the kids and helping them, talk with them about the subject matter, talk with them about how to learn, and help them to support what's being done.
Well, I believe parents or guardians need to be more active, but I don't think we expect them to be teachers. But what we do ask, and there is a student code of conduct in the school code, which we worked out with the PTSA, the Board of Education, the DOE, and HSTA, that says these are the expectations we have of kids coming to school. They're very simple expectations. You will come on time. You will have a meal before you come to school. That's what we ask parents to do. I don't need a parent who maybe didn't finish high school to sit there and do the new math with their kids. But I do expect
we don't understand half the time.
But I do expect the parent to say to me, jot me a note, I'm the teacher, you know, my son doesn't seem to be getting it. So that gives me a clue that maybe I need to spend a little bit more time with the son.
Explaining that, No, I know myself, I've been through a number of instances. We're also licensed foster parents, so we have some kids that come into our home, and then we get them into schools, and we work with them and see the challenges that all kids have. And there have been a number of times where they've come home with a piece of homework, and I'm looking at it, and I say, I have a degree, I have a college degree, and I don't know what that means. I don't know what this question is asking of you. They're asking you to put it in this form of a graph that I've never heard of before. How do we figure out how to help that student? So immediately we go to Google, we try to find it here, we try to go there. One of the things that has helped me is, my son is older than my daughter, so he's been through some of this and he picks up on it quicker. So he teaches all of us, oh, we did this and this. Oh, okay, wow. So, that's the only way that sometimes the parents can be there to help.
Well, Konakakai Elementary, a number of years ago, we gave them a grant. They ran a project teaching parents how to help their kids with homework. And the teachers it was third grade, it was a third grade program, and they ran a program on Saturdays. And the parents would come in, or the guardians, so many of our kids don't have dual parents, would come in and they'd tell them, okay, this is how you can help your child with homework. Because they'd say, I have no idea what they're talking about. And what they found out in that project, which was interesting, so many of the fathers in particular could not read. And so what they found is fathers were coming to the teachers and saying, do you think you can find a way to teach me how to read.
Wow.
So they set up a literacy program, or a reading program. But it was a school that took the bull by the horns and said, yeah, these parents are struggling.
Is that the administration or is that the teacher?
It was the third grade teachers put the project
So
together.
the third grade teachers take their extra time
Yes.
that they're not being paid for
Yes.
to help the community.
Yeah. But it also took a good administrator saying, more power to you.
Allowing them and not stopping
and
them.
not saying, I think this is a bad idea, and,
yeah.
you know, I know you guys are gonna file a grievance if you don't get paid.
Yeah.
The principals stayed out of the way and let the teachers go with the
See.
project. And I think it ultimately went to the 4th and 5th grade. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But then when when Race for the Top came, it stopped.
Oh, wow, yeah. Okay, all right, so how many teachers, if off the top of your head, perhaps you know today, how many teachers are there in Hawaii?
13,600.
13,600 teachers
Yes.
across the entire state.
Yes.
About 255 or 256 schools, yeah?
283.
283 schools.
Because you have to include the charters, because the charter
Okay.
schools are public schools.
Got it. Okay. And for those schools, whether it's charter school or public school, what are the requirements or standards that are in place now in order to be a teacher?
Well, Hawaii has a teacher standards board. It's one of 20-some states that has a teacher standards board. So to be licensed as a teacher in the state of Hawaii, you have to have a state-approved teacher education program. Not every program. I mean, there's some fly-by-night schools, just like there are fly-by-night. You can buy a law degree online for $100.
Sure.
You have to do that. You have to take a state exam. When I left, it was the praxis, and get the appropriate cutoff scores. You have to pass a criminal records check, and then they check your references if you taught in other schools.
Are there any continuing standards or any continuing assessments that are done to make sure that, okay, well, there's new technology or there's new...
Well, teachers have to be relicensed every 5 years.
Okay.
Now, the board got overwhelmed by the task of licensing teachers, so they've gotten way behind. The DOE can hire unlicensed teachers for up to 5 years. And unfortunately, almost 50% of Hawaii's public school teachers today are not properly licensed to teach.
Wait, what was that percentage again?
About 50% are
Are
not properly licensed to teach. Now,
to
that
teach
does,
the course they're teaching or to teach it all?
well, they have a state-approved education program, but they didn't go through the licensing process. That's
Okay.
one group.
Okay.
Then there's a significant number of people who don't even have state-approved education programs. They're engineers, they might be secretaries, firemen, policemen, who have come in. They can teach up to 4 years, but they can't continue teaching until they're licensed.
So they're licensed.
And then there are 96 Teach for America teachers who are not licensed and are not education. They don't have an education background.
So this was done in order to make sure we have more teachers in the classroom.
Well, as one DOE person said, we want to be sure we have a warm body in every classroom.
Which does not indicate the quality
That's right.
of that education.
That's
It just
right.
indicates that there's someone
There's a
sitting
warm
in the
body.
room, basically.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, a state disgrace.
It's a problem, but one of those problems is how do we bring more teachers in? How do we get more people interested in becoming a teacher and having them stay as a teacher? What do we have to do in order to bring more teachers, certainly to raise the overall quality as well, to the profession and to the state?
I can tell you what HSTA's plan was when I was there. First of all, 52% of teachers who come in to teach in Hawaii come from the mainland. They used to get a lot from the East Coast, and now they get a lot from the West Coast. But there's lots of ways to do that. The thing is, you got to be willing to do it. Number one, teachers tell us that they leave teaching because they feel they have no freedom or flexibility. So teacher empowerment would be a major step forward.
Going back to your original
Yes.
mission.
Secondly, they feel they need support, administrative support, both from the school level, the complex level, and the state level. When Linda Lingle came out and said our schools are failing, it was like driving a knife through the heart of teachers.
Yeah.
Thirdly, they've got to be paid enough to survive within this state.
Which goes to a couple things. It goes back to the 12-month contract versus 9-month contract.
Well, there's lots of ways of doing it. And we have to find ways for people to become teachers without carrying huge debt. When I got my master's degree at the University of Michigan, I got a federal grant that actually paid me more than I made teaching. But it was the old National Defense Education Act grant program. And there was also a loan program. We've encouraged the legislature to pass a Hawaii version of that. So they'll pay your tuition, Carl, if you go get your teaching credentials.
Sure, yeah.
If you choose not to teach, you owe them back the money.
Yeah.
If you choose to teach and you go to an economically disadvantaged area, they wipe out 10% of that loan every year.
I know they do programs similar to that in Chicago as well.
Yes.
Not just at the teacher level, but also administrator level.
Right, absolutely. And then I think if we stop bad-mouthing schools,
Yeah.
I mean, who wants to work for an employer everybody says doesn't know what they're doing?
Yeah, well,
Right.
there's bad-mouthing the Department of Education,
Yeah.
whether or not it's
Yeah.
justifiable in some ways. It's not about bad-mouthing them, it's about being constructive
Yeah.
and being solution-oriented.
And finally, the community of, for example, we recommended to the DOE that they create teacher housing. I was talking to Larry Ellison's education advisor, and I said, Larry Ellison could build teacher housing on Lanai because they have lots of property on the school, not only for teachers, but police, fire. They have no housing on Lanai. So why in the world would somebody spend their career on Lanai living in somebody's bedroom?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
the ability to afford it. So
Yeah.
no matter where you're coming
Yep.
from, whether you're
Yep.
just coming from Molokai or
Yeah.
whether you're coming
Build
from Maui.
workforce housing.
Yeah.
We have several mortgage companies that we worked with who would give teachers special rates on mortgages.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
1% and no points.
Would you give, we have to make another quick break, but would you give someone who went through the program and said, okay, the state's going to pay you to get your teacher certification so that you could be qualified to teach, would you say that's a 3-year, 5-year program where you must teach it for a minimum number of years and then you can go to the private sector if wanted, or, and then it's up to us to try to keep them there?
Yeah. The NDA program, I think, required them to teach 3 years,
Okay.
period. If you want your loan forgiven, you're talking 10 years.
Okay.
10% every year for 10 years.
Sure, sure. Okay. And again, that can make sense and that
Yeah.
can really drive some quality
Absolutely.
people. I can agree with that. Okay. We need to take another break. It'll be a quick break again. So again, I'm Carl Campagna, host of Think Tech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. And once again, thank you to my guest, Ms. Joan Husted. We'll be back in a moment. Mahalo.
Okay, this is Think Tech Hawaii, and it's Wednesday. Every Wednesday is Energy Wednesday here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Come and listen to us. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to ask Sharon to tell us more.
Come and see us every Wednesday, as Jay said. And we have people like Jim Albers from HECO here and co-host Ray Starling here every Wednesday. We not only go on Olelo and OC16, but also stream live. So please come visit us, hear about the latest in clean energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here. You got any comment on all this?
As important as energy is in all of our lives today, this is a great forum and a great format to vet those issues. So I encourage everybody to listen in and participate.
Okay, Ray, what do you think for a close?
Well, I think this is the greatest show in the energy world here in Hawaii. You can come here every week, 1 hour, and catch the latest on what's happening and hear from the people who really know what's going on, like Jim Alberts. We appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Ray Starling, Sharon Moriwaki, Jim Alberts, and Jay Fidel here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5
Aloha.
p.m. Wednesday. Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back to Think Tech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. I'm Carl Campagna, your host. And again, we have our amazing guest, Ms. Joan Husted. So thank you again. We're now going to move into, I guess, our final segment here, which is about curriculum. And there's been a lot of debate between the current Common Core system versus a more comprehensive approach to teaching. And what's more, many people say that if they could afford it, they would send their kids to private school over public school. but they can't afford it, or there's a wait list and they don't get in. So what would you say are the differences between a public school and a private school from a teacher's perspective?
Oh, that's a very complex question. Well, one of them certainly is why one of my staff members once characterized it this way. He said the private schools take off our academic role models. So when you think of Waianae High School, you think of football teams, you don't think of scholars. If you think of Punahou, you tend to think of scholars and people who are going to make it in the community. So our biggest difference, of course, is public schools, rightfully so, must take every child who wants to enter. Private schools do not have that obligation to do that, and they tend to be very selective in who they take. They also, public schools, do not have the luxury of simply, quote unquote, kicking kids out. Private schools can.
Yeah. If you're not cutting it, if you didn't hit the grade, then you got to go back to public school.
One of my favorite stories is a son of a friend of mine got caught smoking down by off School Street where they pick up the Kamehameha kids, and because he wasn't even on school property. And they suspended him for 2 weeks. Yeah. If we tried to do that, oh my goodness gracious, you would hear the screams and shouts all over the place. So there's those changes. Private schools tend to allow their teachers greater freedom and flexibility to be creative, but they're not always quite that free. You know, we organized a number of private schools in the 70s. One of the number one criticisms the teachers had is they lacked some ability to be more creative because they wanted to satisfy the parents. After all, they were paying all this money. So there are significant differences, but we also have a cultural value for private schools. That's why we have the largest number of private schools. When I was in Michigan, if you sent a kid to private school, it was because they couldn't behave. Yeah. Here, you send a kid to private schools because private schools educate, public schools train, and I want my kid educated.
Right, yes. And again, there's this cultural belief, or perhaps it's a misconception, and it's one of the things that we look at as far as the standards again. So what, as a parent, my kids, I've got one, fortunate, my son got himself into Kamehameha. Proud of him for that. He did it himself. My daughter applied. We don't know if she's going to get in, but we have to sit there and wonder and be curious. Well, okay, well, if she doesn't get in, where is she going to go? And how do we feel about that? And you know what? Instead of doing that, instead of worrying about that, why don't we just raise those standards? Why don't we identify what those challenges are and then figure out what we have to do by putting a priority on it to raise those standards so we don't have that sense of, well, I have to go to public school. And my friend got to go to private school. Well, you know what? It doesn't have to be that. It can be more. You can do more. Now, I know, a couple of things. My son gets to go to Kamehameha, so therefore all of his classrooms are air-conditioned. I know that he's got a number of extracurricular programs. I know that they teach him from a wide range of perspectives, and what he brings home I find amazing and very creative as opposed to what my daughter brings home. And that's where I'm looking at, okay, the Common Core teaching you to take a test concept versus comprehensive approach. We're going to teach you how to think so you can solve a problem. I actually look at it, I use the analogy, if you give a person a fish, they eat for a day or they eat for a meal. But if you teach them how to fish, they eat for the rest of their lives. Well, you know what? If you teach a child how to take a test, you taught them the answers to the test. You didn't teach them how to solve a problem. But if you teach them how to think and how to become problem solvers, it doesn't matter what class you put them in. It doesn't matter what environment you put them in. They know how to solve the problem so they can succeed. And that's what I see, at least, I don't know, from a theoretical perspective, that's what I see as one of the challenges that's there. Maybe it's a perceived challenge, not a real challenge. But what are your thoughts as far as the current curriculum that we have in public schools, and how, I don't know, and what as it would compare to the more freedom that private schools can have?
Actually, I'm not so sure it's a curricular problem. What we have going on now in public education is a clash of two philosophies, and it's nationally, it's not just in Hawaii. You have the business model, data-driven philosophy, and you have the educator's philosophy. One says data is the end-all be-all. Kids have to have good test scores, high test scores, otherwise the schools are failing. The other one says we need to teach the child, not the test. And Robert Reich in the 1990s predicted this would happen because business took a look at the multi-billions of dollars in public education and said, you know what, we'd like a cut of this. And so we went to the data-driven. Arnie Duncan was a man who was a strong believer in tests and data. Well, I can tell you a personal story. I got my master's degree at the University of Michigan. I went through the Rackham School of Graduate Studies. Had Michigan required the SAT to get into Michigan, I would never have made it in. I have a learning disability and I do terrible on tests. But I was an all-A student in my master's program. And Michigan always maintained tests are not the end-all be-all. Finland gives no tests, standardized tests.
So the ability to figure out how a child, and you hear this echoed a lot, how a child learns.
Absolutely.
What they're good at, how they're good at it. Some are more auditory, some are more visual, some are more manual.
Yeah. Well, that's what made Apple so successful as a computer, because it was tactile, auditory, and visual. So so people did very well on Apple computers because it attracted. Right now we're saying cookie cutter, everybody needs to learn this way.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to pass this test.
Which means you don't have the ability to craft it for the child.
Yeah.
The child has to step up or not.
A child goes into special ed based on an individualized test, and then we turn around and give them group tests.
Wow.
And then we go, well, they're not doing very well.
And then we blame the teacher.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we say you're not teaching right.
I think the message is, and we need to wrap up here, but I think the message here is, it's more than one thing. It's not just the teacher. It's not just the principal and the administration.
Absolutely.
It's not just the Department of Education. It's not just the families. Right. It certainly isn't the union. It's you know what? It's
right.
It's the community.
My vice president, Joan Lewis, said, tell me what you want me to accomplish and give me the freedom to get the kids there.
See, and there you go. There you go. Well, again, thank you, Joan. I really appreciate you being on the show. I thought this was a great conversation. I know I learned a lot. I hope that people watching learned a lot. I believe they did. And I would love to have you come back again at some point. So mahalo again to everybody for joining us on Think Tech Hawaii's Education, Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. We will be back next week at noon, same time, same place. Next week, our guest is going to be Ms. Kaui Sang, the director of the Kupuna program. And that's going to be a very interesting and wonderful conversation as well. I hope you join us. Mahalo.